Our next guest, he spent 28 years behind bars for a crime he did not commit in New Orleans. He was just released October 19th, 2022, just a couple of months ago. Let's bring him on. Mr. Kunta Gable, how are you, sir?
And you? I'm fine, and you?
I'm doing great. I'm doing great. Thank you for being here. I know this. How you feeling? It's been a couple months. How's your spirit? How's your soul?
Oh man, I'm just hanging in there, trying to take it all in, take them step at a time, but it's rough. It's definitely rough, man. Trying to adapt to certain situations. It's been a minute, so eventually I'll get it. I'm working on it.
And this technology out here, it's kind of crazy, right?
Very difficult for me. The phones and things of that nature. I'm working on it. I'm practicing every day. Want to catch up, as soon as possible.
The phones get me confused, Mr. Gable. Just some of the phones, I'm like, what is going on? What's happening? So I can only imagine. I always start here, Mr. Gable. Let's go back to 1994. You were 17 years old. You're living in New Orleans, Louisiana. Just tell me the teenager, the young person that you were, how you were living your life, just who you were when you were a teenager back in 94.
Okay, well, basically, like most of my neighborhood or my youth, I was raised in the Iberville housing project. It's kind of low level, poverty situation. Was influenced by a lot of people that I grew up with, for the most part. That didn't turn out too good for me, which led to me having a few run-ins with the law, with my little juvenile cases or whatnot, which eventually led to my incarceration with the last charge that I caught that I was previously released from Angola for. But my childhood, I had a nice one. Grandparents raised me. They did the best they could inside a housing project. For the most part, school was nice. I eventually fell out of school. I didn't complete too many grades due to my housing situation. It was kind of tight for me in the neighborhood I was in. The family, they did the best they could. My grandparents did the best they could to raise me right. I wound up in a juvenile facility as a kid before I caught this juvenile charge, which was no more than for stealing a car. After that, my life took a drastic change with this charge when I was released from that charge. Come home and basically I was doing what average kids do in the city. I wasn't nobody that was really in the heavy crime, but I was out there in the streets, and it eventually led to me being incarcerated for this charge for some reason that I was unaware of.
And in case folks don't remember, mid-1990s, 1980s as well, it was a rough time. I'm from Philadelphia. I was 1794 as well. Okay. You had drug wars going on. You had violence going on. You had this horrific policies that were locking people up for minor low-level crimes. A lot of folks forget just how rough it was back then. And if you didn't have money, if you didn't have access to certain things, it was going to be very hard to get by. Hard, little to no access to good jobs and a living wage and on and on and on. Some things never change. So in August of 1994, a young man is killed, 19 years old, and may he rest in peace. I believe his name is Rondell Santenac. Hope I said his name right. May he rest in peace. It's heartbreaking. And it was a drive-by shooting near the Desire housing projects in the 9th Ward of New Orleans, which is the housing projects that you lived in. So I want to start here.
I lived in the
physical. Oh, I'm sorry. Say it again.
I lived in the Iberville housing project. Murder happened in Desire.
Got you. So sorry about that. So you lived in a separate housing project, but the murder happened in the Desire housing projects. And I want to be clear. There's no physical evidence whatsoever tying you to this crime. This is a crime that really revolves around, and I've covered this so many times, y'all, on these airwaves, police corruption. So when you hear, Mr. Gable, how do you even hear that your name is caught up in this drive-by shooting? When does it first come to you, and what are you thinking?
Well, maybe things went to catching up, me finally realizing what was taking place was during the traffic stop. We was actually stopped in a real traffic stop. At the time we was stopped in the traffic stop, there was a broadcast coming over the radio about us being somewhere that we wasn't. And the officer that actually stopped us, I mean, he was befounded himself because he knew he had us on his vehicle. You know what I'm saying? And for them to saying that we was fleeing down Benefit headed toward the interstate when we was actually on the back of the cop car, I mean, it threw us off and threw him off. Then I heard one of my co-defendants' name come across the radio saying that he was the driver of the vehicle. For longer, I mean, a lot of 5th District officers pulled up to the 1st District and they started processing us at that point. They literally had to make their decision.
And it was 2 others. Y'all are in the car together. Leroy Nelson, Burnell Juluk Jr. Y'all are all in the car together. And it is this police officer that gives this description. And wasn't one of the description, wasn't it that a bunch of gold in his mouth? Is that right?
Yes, it was. It was indeed. I mean, well, you know, you have several individuals with a lot of gold teeth in their mouth.
Yeah,
so,
that was the era.
Kind of like, yeah. So it was ironic that he would use something like of that nature. But I mean, there was 3 of us in the car, and they was actually looking for one individual like 30, 40 minutes ahead of time before we even came into the picture.
So, Mr. Gable, tell me what this interrogation is like. You know, when you're stopped by police, how are they grilling you? What is this? Because this is an important part when so many folks get caught.
Yeah, this is very important. Okay.
Yeah.
When I arrived to the homicide building, me and my co-defendants, along with my co-defendants, we arrived to the homicide building. Not one time was we questioned about this murder. Not one time. They never asked us any questions pertaining to this specific charge. Well, I had another charge, but it literally got thrown out. But that's the charge I was questioned about. I was never questioned for Rondell Saturday.
Wow. So if you weren't questioned about, so then how do you find out that you're hit with this charge?
Once I reached central lockup, I went into central lockup and I was booked. When I was booked, then that's when a few things came to light about what was going on with the charge, that we was being arrested for this guy murder. And to that point, we hadn't even know who was in jail for. Literally, we wasn't knowing who was getting arrested for.
So before you are charged, you are questioned, and you never even hear Mr. Rondell's name.
Not one time. Not one time.
Not one time.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. So you are charged with this crime, and along with 2 others. Thankfully, they've been exonerated as well too. So you're arrested in 1994, and here's the part that gets me: your trial isn't until 1996. Is that accurate?
Indeed.
2 years behind bars.
Mm-hmm.
So tell me a bit about this trial. The trial begins in late February. I think it ends a few days later. Tell me about this trial. Again, no physical evidence whatsoever, but tell me about this trial.
Okay, well, basically with that, I mean, we had several witnesses that come on our behalf, at least 9 witnesses coming by our behalf to explain where we was at the time at an event in our neighborhood. And basically we had this one witness that testified against us, which I knew him personally, who testified against us. For what reason he was given the information he was given, I don't know. Who forced the information on him, I don't know. But he was adamant about we was the ones who committed this crime, and he stuck to it through the whole process. But there were several people that he knew in the neighborhoods that he was telling that it wasn't us who did it, and that the cops had actually made him say we did.
Wow. I'm just curious to know, what was the racial makeup of the jury in 94?
It was pretty much balanced off. It was balanced off. I think a few things in our trial that kind of got twisted as far as the time. The whole case is based upon the time frame, and the time frame kind of gave the district attorney leverage to make it work. I mean, the time frame, they actually didn't have certain material to show that We was in the traffic stop when the crime specifically happened. And the data sheets that shows the time frame in between we got stopped and in between the time of the crime, it shows it was impossible for us to make it from one spot to the other, considering, you know, the facts of the case. But at the same time, I mean, they let the time lapse while we were sitting there in the traffic stop. He didn't make an arrest. The guy who made the traffic stop, he wasn't arresting us for the traffic stop. He waited till the 5th District officer arrived from the 5th District on the scene, and he allowed them to process the whole case.
So you're still a teenager at this point, but I'm just wondering, as you're seeing how this trial is going, are you thinking it's a wrap? They're going to convict me, or are you still having hope that I didn't do this? That of course I'm going to be acquitted.
At the beginning stages, I definitely feel like the charge was going to be beat. I mean, I was offered a deal. I was offered 6 years where I had to do 3, only half. At that time, I had like 2 years and a month in, so I'd had 11 months left to actually, you know, do if I would had plead guilty to the charges. I refused to plead guilty to it. I mean, because I know where me and my co-defendants were. I know we didn't have anything to do with it. We had several people to support us and back us with that. So I turned the deal down, and as the trial began on trial date, I turned the deal down again. And the process just, I mean, as we're going through the process, I could see that we was going to get found guilty. They literally had put it together.
You were charged with first-degree murder, and you were found guilty, and your sentence was life without parole, which is the mandatory sentence in Louisiana for non-capital murder. The law then changed years into your sentence. But when you hear that life without parole, of course, you're found guilty, then you're sentenced. But what goes through your mind and your soul when you hear that?
At that point, I was broken to see my family. You know, my family go through it. You know, situations they had to go through to try to help me get out within them 2 years before I was convicted. And I just was lost. I was confused. I couldn't believe it happened. You know, but at that point, man, I mean, just had to start rebuilding myself.
And when you go to prison, do you go to Angola?
Indeed.
Which is one of the most violent prisons, especially back then in the country.
Yeah, definitely not a place for kids, man.
Yeah, again, you're a kid. I want to stress that you're a kid. You said you had been incarcerated before, correct?
Yes, I have.
Yeah. I mean, I know you've been incarcerated before, but nonetheless, it's still incredible trauma going back to prison for a crime you didn't commit. Mr. Gable, how are you surviving? How are you surviving? When you think of prison, you think of violence in so many ways. How are you surviving the day by day?
Well, I'm like I said, I'm just trying to take it a day at a time. When I left New Orleans on that charge and was arrested, it was the murder capital of the world. And I got released when it became the murder capital once again, 28 years later. So certain signs, I'm a person that's in the sign, pay attention to detail. I would like to think, for the most part, I'm just trying to stay focused out here, but it's rough.
In prison, what was your lowest moment?
My parents passing of my mother, my father, my grandfather, my grandmother, my aunt, cousin. I mean, that was like, you know, because I'm a real family-oriented guy. My family hung in there with me. The rest of my family hung in there with me for the rest of the 28 years. You know, they did everything they could to help me get out until I reached that point. You know?
And the 28 years, you know, what was the day by day like for you? What was the skills you had to utilize to get through the day by day?
Well, Angola's a rough place. Well, actually, when I went, it was a real rough place. It's still rough. I mean, but you basically have to adapt to what's going on in the situation inside the prison because it's not a rehabilitation situation that I went into. You know, it wasn't a place that I could go into and literally get myself together as, you know, entering. When you enter the jailhouse, there's not much for you to do. With me having a life sentence, school wasn't a thing because you have a life sentence, so they wouldn't necessarily allow you to get in school like that. a lot of job skills and programs that they have. You had like natural life centers. You wasn't allowed to participate in that because they had guys that was like in reentry programs, things of that nature, that was going back into society, that was afforded them jobs in them drops. So basically, I was doing real hard labor, slavery work in the field.
You're working in the fields. Did they have you
Yes,
picking cotton?
everything from cotton, pulling plastic, chopping down trees. I mean, any vegetable you can name. I'm talking about. It's a lot of land, man. We worked on it every day.
What does that do to your psyche? Because when you think about picking cotton and being a Black man in the South, I mean, even as a teenager, you have to know what that means. What were you
Yes, well,
thinking as
for
you're doing that
me,
kind of
for me
labor? Yeah.
personally, for me personally, with my name being Kunta, it affected
Hmm.
me real bad because I literally understood that I was on a plantation and the actual, activities that were taking place there, it was no longer just a fantasy or something to me or something that took place before my time. I was actually living it. I was living it. I understood my ancestors been through. I literally went through
And were you named Kunta after roots?
it. Indeed, 1977, February, same year the movie came out.
Yep, that's when the movie came out. That's when the miniseries came out, and
Mhm.
your family names you Kunta, and that's
My
really
mother,
powerful
yes.
that you are on a field working. It's just that there's some
Yeah, yeah.
strange,
Yeah,
just
had I
painful
been
irony there.
guilty of the crime, maybe my mentality wouldn't have been, the way it was in there. But due to that, I was innocent of the crime and me being there and had to deal with those situations. A lot of times I found myself in a situation where I would rebel a lot. A lot of things I feel like I didn't have to do because I wasn't necessarily supposed to be there. And that kind of hindered me from making my way back to society because now there's a lot of things I missed out on, a lot of things that I could have got involved with, I didn't participate in because of my situation. So it stagnated my growth.
Absolutely,
Mhm.
absolutely. So I know this is, you know, still complicated because you were just released in October. But tell me a little bit of how, just so the audience understands, how you are eventually released and still fighting to be technically exonerated. But just tell me a little bit how you're eventually released.
Okay, I had several attorneys since I've been in jail or incarcerated. My family literally kept me with a paid for attorney the whole time. This is not to discredit the attorneys, but they wasn't putting in the work that needed to be done in this case. I mean, every lawyer I paid, they didn't bring me anything that would help this case until I received the attorney that I have now. I always share this, that I didn't have to pay $1 American for him to put the work he put in and free me. I appreciate Mr. Josh Swans and all his assistance in every way possible. And I would like to thank the judge and the district attorney for seeing, the case for what it was.
Listen, folks like Joshua Schwartz, they do God's work. They literally
Indeed,
do God's
indeed.
work. It's really important. So you and your two other co-defendants, is that right? Your co-defendants,
Mm-hmm,
they were exonerated as well. Leroy Nelson, Burnell Jaluki Jr.
mm-hmm,
All three y'all were not. I'm sorry, not exonerated yet. That's a little technicality, y'all, if y'all are listening out there. But
mm-hmm.
technically, they're not exonerated yet. But it's going to happen, God willing. And y'all
Indeed.
were released in October of 2022, a couple of months ago.
Mm-hmm.
Sadly, your mother and father they're no longer here. So I'm sure that must have been hurtful, but what was it like to finally be free?
It's amazing. I'm still taking it all in, man. It's a beautiful thing, man. It's a long process. Still kind of jittery. I deal with anxiety attacks a little bit. So trying to get used to the crowds, being around crowds. I mean, basically when I was dealing with the crowds in prison, I knew what to expect from them crowds. But being re-entering the society, been gone so long, things have changed so much since I've been here. You know, I kind of get kind of paranoid when I'm in big, large crowds and whatnot. So my family got people working with me on that, but I can't seem to, you know, catch grips with it. You know what I'm saying? I'm somewhere too long. I gotta go. I gotta go. See too many crowds and I can't see what's going on. I gotta go. You know what I'm saying? So it's just my anxiety. I have to deal with that. Outside of that, I'll be fine.